So the SDG Fund is an interagency mechanism created in the UN in order to implement the Agenda 2030, which is, as you know, the new Agenda for Development, approved in September 2015 by all member states. So one of the goals in the agenda is, the goal 16 is access to justice, which has a lot of different consequences and impact in different areas of law, politics, ethical issues, and in different areas of knowledgement. So what we are trying to do is to open a dialogue with different stakeholders, trying to discuss a little bit about the content of this access to justice that sometimes is very easy to formulate and very complicated to implement. So just to explain a little bit why we are working here with the University of Navarre and also the Association of Lawyers, the reason is because when the fund was created, we are working with all member states and also with the private sector, and the main goal of the fund is just to work in two tracks. One of the tracks is the implementation of specific programs in the field, joint programs we call, which are programs with the support of at least 3 agencies of the UN working with us, trying to use the expertise of each of the agencies, and also trying to ensure the national ownership of the programs, just to avoid in some way the traditional way to do development in this patronizing way, if I can use this word, which means that sometimes I give the money to the country and I explain to the country what they have to do. So we would like to ensure the national ownership and the priorities for every country, and that's the reason because we introduced there as a requirement for all the projects to have matching funds. If I give you $1, you have to find an additional dollar from the local actors, with the idea that locally you are promoting the creation of a network that when we, meaning the UN, finish with the work, we are at the same time trying to ensure the sustainability of the project. So this is one of the tracks where we are working. Currently, we are working now with 15 agencies of the UN in 22 countries. And then in parallel to the implementation of the joint programs, we are trying also to do an important work engaging the different actors that are in the agenda, but they don't have really a tradition working with the UN, meaning private sector, academia, civil society, interfaith organizations, and so on. So we decided to start a specific work with each of the actors, trying to engage them as actors, because, I'm thinking, for instance, in the case of the private sector, it's very easy to say that we are going to work with the private sector as a donor. That is wonderful, but the point is to have them not only as a donors, but also as an actors. So how to engage the academia, how to engage the civil society. So what we are trying to do with this initial dialogue, because this is the first one, is just to open a conversation with the academia. We created a year and a half ago a chair for sustainable development. You can check all the publications and everything in the online library that we have in the webpage of the SDG Fund. And the idea is also to see how the academia can work as actors in the implementation of the agenda. Which is not easy, really. Not easy, because I think that there are many universities doing philanthropy, many universities working with specific programs in the field, but the point is how to use the most important thing that the university has, which is the knowledge, in order to implement the new agenda for development. So we are in this process, and also there is another sector, which is the lawyers and people working in the area of justice. I'm a lawyer, so I think that I can speak very freely. But sometimes it's not easy to see how to engage also lawyers associations, lawyers schools, in order also to be actors. And that's the reason because we decided to prepare this breakfast. This one is the first one, with the idea to see how is the approach to access to justice from the point of view of international organizations. So the idea is to have this first breakfast, trying to discuss a little bit the point of view of, or the perspective from the UN. Then we are going to have another one from the Latin American perspective, another one from the European perspective, and another one from the African perspective, with the idea that at the end of the year, we can have a paper explaining the international approach to access to justice. As you know, yesterday was it was the launch of the last report on goal 16, with the idea to see which kind of indicators can we use in order to ensure the access to justice. So I think that there are many efforts and many people working, but the idea is try to put everything together, mainly to achieve the main goal that we have, which is to improve the life of the people in many countries, especially keeping in mind that the agenda is a universal agenda. It's not an agenda for developing countries or for middle-income countries. It's a universal agenda, and in some countries that are very rich, they have also a lot of problems and poverty gaps and inequality gaps that also need to reflect a little bit about this access to justice. So with this in mind, we organized this breakfast with two institutions, with the University of Navarre and the Association of Lawyers in Spain. With the University of Navarre that we have here, the Dean of the Law School. I'm really very proud, especially because it's my alma mater. So I'm really very proud that they agree with this activity. But also at the same time, now the University of Navarre is one of the, in the rankings of Europe, is one of the most, in the better position, if I can say so, in the rankings in Europe, and I think that it is a good opportunity really to have them engage on this. And also, I'm going just to introduce one by one to the people that we have. Feel free, please, to have your breakfast and your coffee, but we would like to have an informal conversation. But today, because the point of view is the UN, we invited Alejandro Alvarez, the Director of Rule of Law in the Executive Office of the UN Secretary General, that will speak at the end, because he has a previous meeting and he was not able to be here on time at 9:30. So that's the reason, because he's going to speak in the last minute. So first of all, I'm going to give the floor to Jorge Noval, who is the Dean of Law School in the University of Navarre, located in Pamplona in Navarre, in the region, in a specific region in Spain. But they are working on an international base, meaning that they have university daughters in many countries, and also business school, especially here in New York. There is a business school also located in the west side, I think, the IESE, and also he is going to explain what they are doing much better than me. And also Juan Cianciardo, who is the professor in the university coordinating the whole project. And also we are going to have a wonderful woman here, which is Rangita De Silva, is the Associate Dean of International Affairs in the University of Pennsylvania. Really a visionary person about the work of the academia with the UN. We have a memorandum of understanding, and we are doing many things with students, professors, law firms here in New York. So every time that Rangita organizes something, I always say yes, because I think that she is really a very active person doing an incredible job in the university and also outside of the university. And finally, we will have Alejandro Alvarez, that, as I mentioned, is working in the office of the Secretary General, working specifically on rule of law. I will give him the floor at the end. So thank you so much to all of them for being here. I wanted before to give the floor to Jorge Noval from the University of Navarre. I also would like to use the chance to give thanks to my team that really did an incredible job to organize everything, and for sure also the team of the University of Navarre that help and support a lot the work that we are doing on this area. So thank you so much.
Good morning, everyone. In my good morning. My capacity of Dean of the Law School of the University of Navarra, it's my pleasure to welcome you to this event. It's a great satisfaction, the opportunity to work together, the United Nations and the University of Navarra, this collaboration in this topic. And I would like to thank Mrs. Paloma Duran and the Sustainable Development Goals Fund for this opportunity. And I think it's not an accident, it's not a chance result, these collaborations. I have realized that the United Nations and the University of Navarra share the same acronyms, U and N. So I think that it's a signal that we are called to work together, not only now, but also in the future. With regard to the access to the justice, I have to say, I have to recognize that I'm not an expert in this field. I'm dedicated to commercial law, but however, in our university, one of our priority research line is the human rights. We offer a human rights master degree, and it has been the germ that led us to create a discuss group about this topic of the universal access to justice and other initiatives that in order to promote the analysis, the academic studies in this field. This topic is connected with the international aspect of our university. It's an international problem, and our university is a very international university. In Spain, we have 20 of our students come from other countries. That is not normal in Europe. And we have courses here at the building of our business school here in New York, the IESE, and we organize other programs in London, in Washington, Shanghai, and even the next year in Middle East. Coming back to the subject, the universal access to justice, I think that it's a very important goal, a very important challenge. Yesterday, when we came here to New York on the plane, there was a person very, very annoyed. One of the possibilities of the menu was over, so he didn't have the option to choose. He made a big complaint. It was incredible for me, no? We are not going to talk here about these types of catastrophes. We are talking here about daily real tragedies. In many countries, many people suffer violations of their most basic rights. They don't receive any compensation. In many countries, justice is delayed and even denied. In many countries, justice is slow and even unfair. So we need that to work together with the international organizations, the universities, the lawyers, to think about how can we help to provide a better legal protection for these persons to improve their rights. I hope, or we hope, that this breakfast dialogue and this opportunity help to this problem and be of interest to all of you. I leave you with Professor Juan Cianciardo. He's a real expert in this topic. He's the director of the Human Rights Master degree that we have in Spain. I hope that I'll be able to greet you at the end of this meeting. Thank you very much for your presence and for your attention.
a few words about the grounds and present challenges of the right to access to justice. My purpose is to point out one of the core fundamentals of the right to access to justice and its connection to some of its present challenges. I will conclude with a reference to the need to strengthen judicial independence. I have only 3 points, 2 ideas and 1 conclusion. First idea, the rule of law, the justification of the fundamental right to access to justice. The right to access to justice is grounded on one of the 8 desideratas of the rule of law exposed by Lon Fuller in his renowned book, The Morality of Law. As is well known, according to Fuller, any legal rule should meet 8 minimal conditions in order to count as genuine law. The rules must be sufficiently general, publicly promulgated, prospective, at least minimally clear and intelligible, free of contradictions, 6, relatively constant, and 7, possible to obey. The 8 desiderata is administrated in a way that does not widely diverge from their obvious or apparent meaning. The rule of law entails two propositions that also serve as its point or meaning. First, man is rational. Second, insofar as man is rational, he/she is also entitled to dignity, that is, to be always treated as an end in itself and never as a means. In effect, so long as man is rational, he/she acts guided and moved by reasons for actions. And so long as man is worthy in itself, whoever purports to guide him/her disregarding true reasons for actions treats him/her as a mean. Out of the 8 desiderata, we are now concerned with the 8th one, that include the right to access to justice, that on turn entails A, the institutional dimension of law. Second, B, the nuclear role of justice in instantiating the institutional dimension of law. C, the due connection between law, morals, and politics. Second idea, the challenge of populism to the access to justice. For some time now, we are witnessing a blooming of a cluster of conceptions about the connections between politics and law, all of which might be broadly classified under the umbrella to the so-called populism. These conceptions agree, among other topics, on a consistent disapproval of the rule of law. This negative assessment is based on the thesis that the rule of law has been systematically used by hegemonic groups, mainly in developing countries, in view of holding their hegemonic positions, and thus impeding or gravely hindering the task of legitimate governments. According to this understanding, legal discourse, more specifically the 8 desiderata of the rule of law, would have been seized and turned into a dominating tool by business groups, trade unions, intellectuals, high society, and other dominant groups. The best and perhaps only remedy against this challenge would thus consist in reducing the intensity of the requirements of the rule of law, in order to help governments, more often than not driven by a charismatic leader, in their struggle against the named anti-majoritarian groups. This lightening of rule of law requirements will also, and perhaps mainly, apply to the 8 desiderata. Even more, this specific elevation would be one of the main objectives of the purported revolution. The point of justice as a revolutionary institution would consist, under this like, in dismantling the dominant discourse and trying to construct a new law, emancipated for the ongoing oppression. Of course, nothing of this can be done with a deep reconfiguration of the political role of justices. The new role of justices has until now followed two directions, not always concurrent. On the one hand, the straightforward assertion of a principle of legality in the fashion of positivism, legal positivism. On the other hand, the alignment of justice behind passing public policies. The first direction has led to a significant reduction in the levels of judicial review. The second one has resulted in the manipulation of due legal procedures for the appointment, disciplinary control, and removal of justices and legal officers generally. First idea, second idea, and now some conclusions. First, the right to access to justice is grounded on the rule of law, which in turn is grounded on the rational nature and the dignity of man. Second, the political conceptions that may be classified as populist claim that the independence of the judicial branch has been used by hegemonic groups as a tool for retaining their dominant position. On this ground, they overtly advocate for reducing the level of judicial independence, and by it, the institutional background of the right to access to justice is gravely weakened. Third, notwithstanding impairing the right to access to justice or seriously reducing its weight has a direct impact on the rational character of law, turning it hardly distinguishable from violence. A deep impairing of this right might also result in an over-disrespect of human dignity. Even if the populist diagnosis concerning the misuse of the rule of law by dominant group were true, the solution, I think, is not acceptable. More even, the diagnosis seems a suitable excuse for advancing equally unacceptable partisan interest. In any case, manipulating the rule of law is always unacceptable, independently of on who does it. Therefore, whether judicial independence is undermined by hegemonic groups or by a populist government, in both cases, the most reasonable breakout is reacting with more judicial independence. That is, with a more stringent rule of law. This would most probably require at least the following. A, strengthening the right to access to justice. Second, a well-designed and educated judicial institutions with more autoritas than potestas. Third, the straightforward assertion of the horizontal effects and not only vertical effects of human rights, the Drittwirkung in German. These horizontal effects entails that not only individuals but also business companies are obliged to the most strict respect and promotion of human rights, which leads to the urgent dissemination of the principle of Ragi. Thank you.
Good morning, Dean. Good morning, colleagues from the University of Navarro. Good morning, Paloma, and distinguished guests. The history of the 20th and the 21st centuries are remarkable for their manifold expressions and articulations for the advancement of both gender equality and access to justice. The 2030 Agenda is one of the crowning achievements of this advancement. and is both a tool of gender justice and access to justice. As the Dean reminded us, access to justice is about universal justice, including both men and women. This morning, I will focus on a few challenges and opportunities to burgeoning developments in the field of access to justice. My comments will be organized under 3 pillars. 1, access to justice as a preventative tool to counter violent extremism. 2, access to justice as an important pillar of transitional justice. And 3, access to justice as a critical cornerstone of the Sustainable Development Goals, Goal number 5's mission to end child marriage. In times of war and peace, access to justice transforms centuries-old culture of impunity into a culture of accountability. Michelle Bachelet of Chile, the former head of UN Women, once said famously that the rule of law often rules women out. Access to justice must mean more than simply helping women to access existing justice systems. Access to justice means transformative justice. Justice systems that are biased against women's interests and reinforce unequal power relations between women and men must themselves be transformed in order to fulfill the full potential of the justice system. Access to justice means that these systems of justice must help to reshape society in more gender equitable ways. It is not just about punishing gender violence, but it is about preventing all gendered forms of violence. For the first time in our history, the UN Security Council Resolution 1325 was formal, legal, and unequivocal recognition that women in conflict was indeed an issue worthy of the Security Council. And the Security Council was authorized to address it. It was formal affirmation that sexual violence and the culture of impunity affects not only women, but the economic and social stability of our communities and our nations. And 15 years later, Security Council Resolution 2242 acknowledged that sexual violence can be a weapon of war, but also a tactic of terror, and that the subordination of women was an early warning sign of violent extremism and radicalization. Strong justice systems help pierce the veil of impunity and also build historical records for gender-based crimes that have long been omitted from official accounts of war and peace. Then strong rule of law systems must reimagine justice paradigms and reimagine justice paradigms in the images of both men and women. As Undersecretary Sainab Bangura has said, when we think of terrorism, we think of destruction of property, killing, bombing, or hostage-taking. But we cannot deplore the public violence of terrorism without ignoring the violence terrorists inflict on women and girls in private behind closed doors. The war of conquest of extremist groups is being fought on and fought over the bodies of women and girls. Without exception, the first sign of rising violent extremism has been the restriction on women's rights. Access to justice, then, is an important pillar of prevention and must become an important pillar of countering violent extremism and preventing violent extremism. Counterterrorism strategies can no longer be decoupled from efforts to protect women through strong access to justice and the rule of law measures. Gender crimes and crimes of violence can no longer be invisible as they once were. And thanks to women's movements and to feminist practitioners and feminist jurists, both men and women, what we see now is that a reimagining of gender justice. And we saw that last year in March when a 3-women bench on the International Criminal Court ruled on the Bemba case and held that sexual violence was a tool of war and that rape was a crime against genocide. So what this underscores was, as the prosecutor of the ICC said, this case highlighted the critical need to eradicate sexual and gender-based crimes as a weapon of conflict. And the Secretary General's plan of action in 2016 on preventing violent extremism said quite the same. It underscored the cause and effect relationship between violent extremism and a weak rule of law. What it means is that violent extremism poses a direct threat to the rule of law, and that violent extremism thrives in a culture that does not respect the rule of law. These groups also violate the rights of women and girls, the Secretary General's report stated, including through sexual enslavement, forced marriage, and the encroachment of women's rights to education and participation in public life. A lack of accountability in conflict areas is contributing to an increase in atrocity crimes. We need to end impunity for all those committing violations and crimes, said the Secretary General's report. But at the same time, the report stated, we must be vigilant in ensuring that member states' efforts to address violent extremism are respectful of the rule of law. And that needs to be underscored because, as my colleague at the University of Navarro said, that might lead to a rising tide of populism, xenophobia, and chauvinism. And in order to address populism, we need to show and ensure that at every level there is respect for the rule of law. That is the only vaccine against the rising tide of populism, chauvinism, and xenophobia. I next move on to transitional justice and examining access to justice as a pillar of transitional justice. We saw that the democratization wave of the 1990s launched a new discourse on issues concerning how people deal with the past, in particular with atrocities and gross violations of human rights. It has been said that transitional justice has come to represent the midwife for a democratic rule of law state. However, paradoxically, rule of law administrations such as courts and prosecutors are often met with suspicion and hostility by women. Acts of sexual violence carried out against women are rarely brought to justice. Therefore, I propose that a more successful approach might be to design a more syncretic approach to justice. After-mass violence is incorporated in the model of transformative justice. What do I mean by syncretic approaches to justice? By that I mean by revitalizing neo-traditional justice systems like the Gakaka courts, to revitalize these court systems along gender equality norms to address solutions to the overwhelming number of sexual violence cases. For example, in Liberia, the establishment of so-called peace huts based on traditional justice systems counseled women who experienced grief and trauma. These huts became a safe space where village women came together to mediate and resolve community disputes. This is where they gathered to discuss matters that affected their daily lives, where the reconciliation and resolution of conflicts took place, and where women demanded police action to end violence against women. It was also where rural women openly and safely discussed issues of inequality and took decisions on peace and security and seek justice. So this is what I mean by a syncretic model of transformative justice, where we bring together traditional approaches to the rule of law, traditional models, traditional Western models of access to justice with localized traditional approaches to reimagining these Western approaches to access to justice and the rule of law. So therefore, thereby we achieve transformative justice. And transformative justice recognizes the significance of symbolic and ritual processes to ensure the local and personal relevance of transitional justice mechanisms. So local community reconciliation processes are experienced as personally meaningful to both men and women and would include traditional rituals like the Nahya Bati rituals in Timor-Leste. Political structure and accountability processes need to be designed for local conditions and with local ownership and incorporate culturally relevant symbolisms and rituals for it to be transformative access to justice. Access to justice also cannot be seen in a vacuum. The United Nations Development Programme reports that violence against women is the principal contributor to citizen insecurity, including economic security. Access to justice in transitional justice must include accountability and sustainable development and respect for human rights and the rule of law. Access to justice is part of peace building and economic security. So it must be more than transitional. It must set up transformative structures, institutional and relationships to promote sustainability, both at the economic and social levels. These structures must also recognize the importance of women's movements to access to justice. Around the world, what we see that women's movements, are the forces, are the mobilizing, defining forces that led to reform initiatives in every part of the world. Triumphs of African women's movement have included the National Action Plans Against Gender Violence in Burundi, Liberia, Sierra Leone, and the DRC, including the reform of penal and procedural codes, training of judges, and support of programs of victims of sexual violence during the conflict. For example, in the DRC, Rwanda, and Sierra Leone. Another major battle for women have been the fight for economic resources, to modify laws on access to land, inheritance, and marriage. So what that shows is that access to justice is an important pillar of economic development. It is a pathway to economic and social security. What we saw most recently in Colombia was a revolution. Access to justice, as President Santos said, led to the peace movement. And as he affirmed, peace now rests in the hands of the women of Colombia. And putting women at the heart of peace was important for the resolution of the war. The gender subcommittees in Colombia were these alternative processes which then became integral and mainstreamed into the formal peace processes. And as part of the transitional justice setup, what we saw were very gendered approaches to peace building and transitional justice, and a separate system to investigate sexual violence was set up under the criminal justice system in Colombia. And women who are heads of household were recognized as both heads of households who are worthy of accessing credit and accessing ownership to land and property. So what we see was the ways in which there was this marriage of both economic security and formal human security. So what we saw was this coming together, this congruence of both economic development and legal development. The importance of lawmaking as part of transitional justice, as part of nation building and access to justice is an important pillar. In Colombia, we saw that because of the powerful mobilizing of women, Colombia's Senate passed an important bill which was a major step in aiding and protecting sexual violence survivors, especially those who were raped or assaulted by the guerrillas, paramilitaries, and the Colombian forces. And under this law, sexual slavery and forced prostitution, which occurred during the conflict, was specifically addressed. And the law recognized that sexual violence crimes can occur under many types of conditions that prevent the victim from giving her consent and isn't defined by use of force or threats. Although the law isn't perfect, it contains many positive changes. It calls for sexual violence victims to receive psychosocial support and free comprehensive medical attention. It pressures judicial authorities to work on these cases as opposed to letting them linger in dusty files. As the dean said, justice deferred is justice dead, right? And it explicitly protects victims against further discrimination based on their past sexual history, behavior, or sexual orientation. No more saying that women deserve the violence that they met. Importantly, the law also stated that sexual violence can constitute a crime against humanity under the standards provided for in international law. Secondly, women need to work across political divides on issues of access to justice. And we saw that in Tunisia. Both secular women and women from the Islamic Party supported Article 21 of the Tunisian Constitution. Article 21 of the Tunisian Constitution championed gender equality and stated that men and women have equal rights and duties and are equal before the law. But in order for it to be a living constitution, the text must be actualized through domestic legislation. Although it took a long time, finally in 2016, the Ministry of Women and Family Affairs drafted a bill criminalizing domestic violence. And the Islamic Al-Nada's party supported the bill, stating that it did not, that in its view, protecting women from injury was not contradictory to Islamic law. This was an important affirmation. Its provisions included prohibiting all forms of violence against women, physical, psychological, sexual, or economic. The law criminalized marital rape and ended impunity for rapists who marry their victims, and also criminalized sexual harassment with either imprisonment or financial penalty as the consequences. For me, the most important affirmation was the unequivocal statement that in the view of the Islamic Party, a law that protected women from injury was not contradictory to Islamic law or Islamic principles of fundamental justice. And finally, I go to the access to justice as an important tool to end child marriage. For the first time in the history of development, we see Goal 5 of the SDG goals enshrining the charge to all nation states to end child marriage, forced marriage, and early marriage as an important human security, human rights, and developmental charge. Recent law reform in Zimbabwe, Mali, and Bangladesh need to be examined in the context because these three countries have some of the highest rates of child marriage. In 2013, Zimbabwe adopted a new constitution which stipulated that no person may be compelled to enter marriage against their will and called on Zimbabwe to ensure that no children are pledged into marriage. This was a constitutional guarantee. In 2014, two former child brides, Mudzura and Ruvimbo, filed an application asking the Constitutional Court to declare the marriage law and the Customary Marriage Act as unconstitutional. And in January 2016, in a historic judgment, the Constitutional Court ruled in favor of the two former child brides and recognized the Marriage Act was unconstitutional and recognized that 18 years was the legal minimum age of marriage. The court ruled that no one in Zimbabwe may enter into any marriage, including customary law unions, before the age of 18, and struck down the Marriage Act. Now, this happened in the context of Zimbabwe, where nearly a third of girls marry before they are 18, and 4% before they turn 15, depriving them of an education, increasing the likelihood of sexual violence, and putting them at risk of death or serious injury in childbirth. It was the access to justice mechanisms that provided for this turning point. And that is why access to justice is a vital, pivotal, and transformative aspect of the Sustainable Development Goals. As of 2016, Malawi had the 11th highest rate of child marriage in the world. Despite a national law which raised the age of marriage, the constitution of Malawi contained a provision which allowed children between the ages of 15 and 18 to get married with parental consent, and merely obliged the state to do no more than discourage marriage by any person aged below 15. Because of advocacy and legal campaigns by various groups, in 2017, this year, the constitution was amended and the minimum age for marriage was raised to 18, harmonizing the laws of Malawi regarding child marriage with international law. And my final case studies from Bangladesh, where on February 27th of 2017, this year, the Bangladesh Parliament passed a law that allowed children of any age to be married under special circumstances. And on March 11, 2017, the President signed this bill into law. Under the Child Marriage Restraint Act of 2017, parents or guardians can get a court order to allow their children to marry if it is in their best interest. The child's consent is not required. I argue that this subverts what is meant by the best interest of the child in the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and that the government officials claim that their aim in creating the exception under this law is to protect unwed pregnant girls from ostracism, I argue is untenable. Women lawyers in Bangladesh right now, as I speak, are preparing to challenge the law in the highest courts of Bangladesh. It is access to justice, once again, which becomes pivotal to achieve the full realization and the full promise of the Sustainable Development Goal 5's call to end child marriage. So once again, as we see, the rule of law still often, unfortunately, rules women out. Obstacles that prevent women from accessing legal protection for their rights persist, resulting in discrimination and inequality that hamper their ability to live free from violence and contribute to society as full and equal citizens. The devastation of conflict exacerbates both the challenges and the impact of discrimination. And as a result, women have the least access to justice precisely when they need it the most. The absence of a strong framework of laws to protect women's rights, backed by effective security and justice institutions to enforce these rights, have wide-ranging impact. And what the Sustainable Development Goals do is to recognize that vital linkage, that security and violence, facilitated by a lack of justice or legal frameworks, effectively prevent women's participation in rebuilding their nations and in efforts for reconstruction, peace building, and development. Without legal security, without access to justice, women and girls will not be able to engage in self-actualization or as economic actors. Women cannot engage in field-based farming or any market activity, which is crucial for early recovery and family survival or community rebuilding. Without a legal age of marriage, girls will not enroll in school. Women will not engage in public life. In short, without justice and security, societies impede the ability of half their population and human resources to contribute to development and peace. Thank you.
Let me first of all thank the Sustainable Development Goals Fund and all the organizers for inviting me to this event. Well, those are issues that are very close to my heart, and I see many, very friendly faces that are working on SDG 16 and access to justice in many other settings. So I know that I'm talking to a friendly, audience. So I'm not going to make the case why access to justice is important for achieving the SDGs. I assume that you all know about that. So what I'll try to focus on is how to be effective on achieving these goals, the overall Agenda 2030, and in particular the goals related to access to justice in the Agenda 2030. So I want to, focus on that. What actually we need to do? What is practice teaching us on how to be more effective to achieve the Agenda 2030? So one of the, my first points would be that access to justice issues is certainly not only for the goal 16, right? I mean, your examples were very, very clear, are related to gender equality. So access to justice issues are across the Agenda 2030. We need to recognize that, and this is, something that has consequences. The work, for example, of the pathfinders on just and inclusive societies, they work very well. They, show very well what are the implications of this access to justice elements, towards the agenda. So do keep this in mind, because those working in these areas, we need to make sure that, rights are realized through accessing, justice across the board. Second, the second element, and that that very well, is the leaving no one behind. It's not access to justice for everybody, even though this can be the goal, but if we had to choose, we need to pick for those that are left behind first. And this is, and we know we have tools for that. You might have heard about human rights-based approaches. Those analyses help us to identify those that are left behind, those that are, more, farther away from a realization of rights. So those, need to be, in our priority. The third element that I want to share with you is that we learned, and we are learning over time, that one of the best ways to catch the attention of governments is to promote reporting, voluntary reviews. Today, this week is the HLPF. Down the line in 2019, we are going to have the HLPF focus on, on a number of goals, including Goal 16. So Goal 16 will be, very much, on top of the agenda. There is one one target in particular, but Goal 16 certainly will trigger the conversation about the whole agenda. So we are, if you wish, promoting very much that actors across the board help promote the idea of reporting and promote governments to get ready to report. Why are we insisting on reporting? Is because the experience is showing us that many countries want to contribute, want to be there in the HLPF, showing the progress that they're making. And reporting is triggering, is helping us to have the conversation about implementation. So, because there's no reporting without implementation. So, reporting on Goal 16 issues are also triggering the conversation about what to measure, how we organize ourselves. So it's not only the implementation, but also across the board the methodology to get organized to achieve the goals. So I would encourage you, wherever you work, to help to work with your, governments to, promote the idea to do solid reporting. If you are in civil society, there are also reporting to do. Some civil society organizations are doing shadow reports. Some of them are introducing one way or another these issues, in the HLPF or side events or here and there. But I find this as well, very interesting. Challenging as well, views that might not be complete from official sources. So again, the reporting is what is triggering further conversation. So I would encourage you to focus on promoting the reporting. Obviously, we find, and I think that all practitioners will be in agreement, that the global indicators are not necessarily giving us the full picture of what we are looking for. So that means as well that when we are supporting governments, when we are supporting different actors, we also are trying to encourage them to create or to adopt other indicators that are going beyond the global indicators, that are eventually regional, comparable, that are tailored for the national situation, that are also going more local. So reporting going beyond global indicators is also something that we are trying to promote. We have been observing that in the processes of doing the reporting and planning for the implementation, most of the time these are processes that are dominated by the executive branch of government. And on this particular issue of access to justice, we've been having conversations with some judicial authorities. I mean, we, in general, the United Nations, right? Having conversations with parts of the judiciary, because it's important that they feel that they are part of the conversation, that they are part of the change as well. The judiciary, the Attorney General's offices, any service that are also providing, legal, aid to administrative, justice, for example, that are very important for many topics. So when the government plans for reporting or implementation, we also suggest advice to include other actors, government actors on this. The other important actor has been so far the national human rights institutions, in general, ombudsmen, human rights commissions. They have a tremendous, sometimes they have, tremendous capacities to gather data, to analyze data, to rely on independent sources. And this is an important element that we are bringing. And tremendous as well a capacity to lobby, to influence the agenda at national and also at global levels. So involving the judiciary, the human rights institutions, and also other government actors are important. And finally, I would say that we are seeing the importance, the relevance, and the opportunity that we have in involving other actors in the conversation of the SDG, both on the implementation and the reporting. In particular, civil society, private sector. You might be aware about the initiative that is called the Global Alliance for Go16, that brings governments, private sector, and civil society. And I think that one of the beauties of this experience and others is that private sector is learning how to contribute to the discussion of the Goal 16 and others. They are understanding little by little, because it's going to take time, how to contribute to the implementation of the SDGs agenda, and how to contribute to the reporting as well, how to put their knowledge and their networks to the service of this agenda. Civil society, I would say, still they are also learning how to look at the broader picture, beyond a particular issue. Even though it's always important, to bring that capacity from a particular issue, but civil society is also learning how to contribute. How to be supportive of the governments sometimes, how to confront different ideas, how to create alternative source of information and alternative analysis. So what I would say is that the whole process, to conclude, the whole process of the SDGs and the HLPF, I don't know if you noticed, but it looks like the HLPFs are getting better and better by the year. So and I would hope that the HLPF from 2009, where 2019, sorry, where we have high hopes, will be even better than the ones that we are watching now. Governments, we hope, will be better organized. Reports will be of better quality, and conversations will be more open. It's a hope eventually, it's a wishful thinking if you want, but I think that that there is a number of things that are going in that direction, and I'm a firm believer that that whatever governments will present in the HLPF, we should create the conditions at national level that whatever they bring here is, seriously enough to resist. To be proven right, or if you wish, to be blunt enough to also share the challenges. We are not there yet. The governments are not necessarily accustomed to share challenges. They are more on, we did that, we did this, we did that. We are, willing to hear more of the challenges. But, well, I suppose that with the support of civil society and other actors, things would eventually evolve in that direction. So, thank you very much for your attention.
So much, Alejandro. I'm really glad that one of the things or one of the ideas is also to engage the private sector, mainly because the report that the SDG Fund now is preparing on Goal 16 is going to be a report prepared with the private sector advisory group, where we have companies from all over the world trying to explain how is the contribution to Goal 16. And also we are going to have the coordination also coming from the university, from Penn Law School, especially thank you to Rangita. So I'm really glad that this is one of the things that we would like to do. So I think that we have now the three perspectives, like a deep approach about the meaning of the access to justice, also this women access, or if you want, the gender perspective integrated in the access to justice, and also the point of view from the UN, where I think that, we have now the perfect agenda, because with the idea of the universality means that not only governments but all the actors have to be engaged in the implementation of the agenda, which is really the perfect approach to improve the situation and to achieve the goal, which is really to improve the life of the people, especially in need. So with these three approaches, I'm going now to open the floor in case anybody would like to add any suggestion, or maybe you have any questions. As I explained in the beginning, the idea of this breakfast, this one is the first one, but with the rest of the international organizations, idea is to have at the end a paper with all the contributions. So if there is anyone in the room coming from the university or from the government or from the business side and would like to participate also in the final version of the paper, we will be glad also to receive it by writing. So I think that my team already distribute a paper in order to get your emails or the contacts in case that you would like also to participate in the final product. So the floor is open. I don't know if there is any question.
Good morning. My name is Katrina Guerrilla, and I work with the Center on International Cooperation at New York University. I want to thank Alejandro for mentioning our work, and I'm really excited to be here because it's so wonderful to see so many different people working on access to justice, something that's very close to our heart. But let me just say just a few lines about the project that we're working on with a number of countries, about 16 countries at this time, who are pathfinders. And Alejandro mentioned the project Pathfinders for Peaceful Justice and Inclusive Societies. They have sort of decided that they want to really make a push for SDG 16 and have come up with the development of a roadmap which basically focuses, as Alejandro was saying, on the implementation. What can we do to show success by and accelerate implementation by 2019 and take a little bit of the fear out of Goal 16? Because as we all know, this is a goal that caused a lot of commotion, let's put it that way, when it was being negotiated, and it still gets a bit of pushback. So I think that the proof of the pudding is in the eating. if we can really show that there is progress being made. And one of the things, aside from the catalytic actions which we're putting forward with the group of countries in this roadmap, is actually 3 grand challenges for the next 2 years. And one is on inclusion, which everybody really talks about, but nobody really knows how to do. So we want to see if we can get groups of people together to try and crack this nut. Another one is to decrease all forms of violence. And the third one is the grand challenge on the access to justice. Argentina, Alejandro's country, is a big leader on this, and they are looking, we're looking with them. Sierra Leone is another big leader in this area, the Netherlands, and a number of countries and civil society organizations like Namati are trying to see, Global Citizen, I'm sure you've all heard of them, would really like to make a huge splash and call 2018 the year for access to justice. So I invite all of you to, let's just all join forces and see if we can make this a success. I would love to see some of the work that you're doing with the private sector, which we are working with, but maybe not as closely as you are. So I look forward to discussing this further with any of you and sharing the draft roadmap, which will be printed today for a side event next Tuesday at midday. So anybody who would like to be there is more than welcome to hear more about the work that we're doing. And thanks, Alejandro, for highlighting it.
We appreciate the universal reach of Goal 16 and the SDGs. We certainly have our justice problems in the United States. I want to spend my minute just to introduce to you justiceindex.org, which is 50 states plus Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico map and ranking system for the states in the United States, focused primarily on the civil justice system. It includes things like a count of civil legal aid lawyers who help the poor, presented as a ratio to the number of poor people in each state. And it also includes technological innovation designed to help people who don't have lawyers, interpreting and translating criteria and rankings based on them, and access for people with disabilities. I won't go on longer about it here, but I do think it would be of interest, and I just wanted to underline the point that was made about transparency and data, in that it pushes, and Amartya Sen has said this also, and we look to him for that idea that transparency, responsible, credible presentation of data really pushes dialogue about what can be done better, whether the right things are in fact being measured as part of the discussion that pushes reform. Doesn't have to be perfect, has to be credible and responsible, and I think that's where the community can be aiming with its use of data to promote access to justice.
The modality for that was agreed upon by member states for the HLPF was that in 2019 the HLPF falls under the purview of the General Assembly. Am I correct on that? If that is the case, then how will civil society, including private sector, academia, and NGOs, be able to address the General Assembly? Wonderful to have this roadmap and pathway to 2019, but if the modality has yet to be decided by member states on how we may present to the HLPF in 2019, I think that perhaps we should be thinking very strategically and creatively on how to move this roadmap forward. Thank you.
But one of the things related to the participation of civil society and so on, maybe Alejandro want to add something on that, but the main thing is also the national reporting. So the General Assembly is fine, and the high-level political forum is fine, but at the end the point is how business, civil society and other entities can participate in the national reporting, where usually member states explain what they are doing, but of course at the national level they have to keep in mind and to take into account what happened with business and what happened with NGOs, because there are, thanks to the new agenda that we have, there are many actors working, trying to implement the agenda. So I think that The point, of course, about the participation in the General Assembly is it belongs to member states, and this is a political issue. But I think that the most important thing is really the national reporting and the national contribution from all the local actors. I really appreciate from New York University really the information, because we are working this year very hard, especially with the private sector and with the members of the private sector advisory group and with the help of Penn Law School, with this report that every year we devoted to a different goal, and this year is goal 16. So I mean, I'm really glad that also you are working on that. I think that as many actors we have working on different goals, as much we are going to improve the situation of people in need. So I think that there is no other questions, other suggestions. I'm really, would like to thank you to all of you. For being here. Thank you, Alejandro, because everybody was very busy that week, but especially I suppose that in the office of the Secretary General is going to be more complicated. But really thank you to all of you, the University of Navarre, the Dean, and also Juan, and Rangita, that always is ready to come to participate in our events and support the work that we are doing here, and also Alejandro. So thank you so much to everyone, and as I mentioned, all the suggestions and comments will be more than welcome to have the final paper where we are going to integrate the point of view of the UN, the result of this breakfast, but also Latin America, Africa, and Europe. So thank you so much, and we will share with you the final products that we are preparing. Thanks a lot.